Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to share today's breakdown with you because we're looking at something truly unique. We are unpacking an incredibly powerful and concise 20-second storyboard of a really well-known biblical event. I mean, think about that for a second. Just 20 seconds. That's all it takes to establish a massive crisis, introduce a solution, completely resolve the tension, and deliver a profound thematic message. Today we're diving into Jesus Calms the Storm, and it is literally a masterclass in how much heavy narrative weight can be carried by just a few precisely chosen words. Let's break down exactly how this sequence is built to see what makes it hit so hard. But before we get into the technical nitty-gritty, I really want you to put yourself right in the middle of the story. Seriously, imagine it. What actually happens when a fierce storm threatens to sink your boat? Take a moment with that. That is the immediate, raw emotional reality this narrative throws us into. There's no gentle build-up, no long introduction. You are instantly faced with a life-or-death scenario completely surrounded by chaotic forces of nature that you absolutely cannot control. Asking this question immediately establishes the massive emotional stakes of what we are about to dive into. It sets a baseline of sheer vulnerability which, as you'll see, makes the rest of the sequence work so incredibly well. Okay, let's dive into this. The whole event is broken down into 4 super rapid sequential blocks of time. Right from 0 to 4 seconds, we have the storm. That is just 4 seconds to establish absolute chaos. Then, from seconds 4 to 10, we shift gears into the command. This is followed immediately by the calm, which takes up seconds 10 through 16. And finally, from 16 to 20 seconds, we get the reaction. It's just a perfectly balanced structure, isn't it? The crisis hits in 4 seconds, the resolution takes exactly 6, the aftermath takes another 6, and the human reaction wraps up the final 4. Visually mapping this out really grounds us in the specific pacing of the story. Every single second is doing massive heavy lifting here. All right, part 1, a fierce, threatening storm. Let's look closer at that very first block of time. This is where the story drops us right into the deep end. Notice how these specific details immediately create a claustrophobic atmosphere of intense visual chaos. First up, dark clouds. Boom, the light is gone, creating this really oppressive environment right above them. Second, crashing waves. You instantly feel that kinetic energy, the sheer physical violence of the water attacking from below. Third, the small boat. And that is a critical detail, right? It emphasizes their total vulnerability and lack of protection against the massive scale of the elements. And finally, the frightened disciples. We see the real human cost, the panic. These 4 elements, packed into just 4 seconds, explicitly set a scene of absolute, overwhelming jeopardy. And alongside that frantic setup, the narration states, a fierce storm threatened to sink the boat and the disciples were terrified. So the crucial point here is that this isn't just a slightly choppy day on the water. Actually, scratch that. The text explicitly highlights a literal life or death situation. The phrase threatened to sink confirms the physical danger, while the word terrified completely locks in their psychological state. They are completely overwhelmed by fear. The hostile environment is perfectly synchronized with a dire verbal confirmation of the threat. Which brings us to part 2, the command for peace. So after the fast-paced, frantic terror of the opening, the narrative forces us to just suddenly slow down. Notice the striking tonal shift here. The dark clouds are still swirling overhead. The crashing waves are still violently threatening this tiny boat, but Jesus stands calmly in the boat, raising his hand. I really want you to picture this stark contrast. You've got a boat being tossed around like a toy, disciples who are visibly terrified, and right in the exact center of that panicked energy, you have absolute stillness. His calm posture is framed directly against the backdrop of the terrified disciples. It's a brilliant anchor that signals a massive, sudden shift in power. And then, accompanying that calm posture, we get the central dialogue of the entire sequence. It's literally just 4 words. Peace, be still. Delivered with absolute authority, these words serve as the ultimate turning point of the entire narrative. Notice how incredibly brief the command is. There is no long, drawn-out incantation, there's no physical struggle against the wind and rain. Merely raising a hand and speaking these 4 simple words is the exact mechanism used to confront a life-threatening chaotic force of nature. Moving into part 3, from chaos to calm. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how we get a rapid, sequential progression of a physical miracle exactly between the 10 and 16-second marks. Let's see how this builds step by step. Step 1, the wind stops instantly. The exact phrasing is, in a moment, the wind obeyed him. There's no gradual dying down of the gale, it is an instantaneous stop. Step 2, the sea becomes completely calm. All that kinetic, violent energy we saw in the first 4 seconds, entirely erased. Step 3. Sunlight breaks through the clouds. The dark, oppressive atmosphere from the opening is completely shattered by light. All of this happens in a span of just 6 seconds. The environment is entirely rewritten. And this brilliantly illustrates the absolute night and day difference we're dealing with. On one side, you have the terrifying threat, dark clouds and crashing waves. On the other side, the tranquil resolution, sunlight breaking through, and a sea that is completely calm. These extreme environmental opposites visually prove the incredible power of the command we just talked about. The absolute terror of the first 4 seconds has been systematically dismantled and replaced by total tranquility. Which leads us to part 4, the disciples' amazement. Okay, so the environment is totally resolved, but the narrative isn't quite finished yet. Now it examines exactly how the characters react to this impossible transformation. Look at the disciples. Remember where they were just 12 seconds ago? They were terrified, utterly convinced their small boat was going straight to the bottom of the lake. Now that sheer terror has been entirely replaced by utter amazement at what they have just witnessed. Their focus has shifted entirely from the external threat of the storm directly to the internal reality of who is sitting in the boat with them. That feeling of total awe is crystallized perfectly by this central question from Mark chapter 4, verse 41. Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? This is really the intellectual and spiritual climax of the whole story. The physical miracle, the wind stopping instantly, the calmed sea, the breaking sunlight. It directly forces the disciples to question his profound authority. The storm tested their physical survival, sure, but the calm? The calm challenges their entire understanding of reality. It leaves them, and us as the viewers, with a massive question about the identity and power of the person who just spoke a storm out of existence. And finally, part 5, trusting in life's storms. Having taken us through the crisis, the intervention, the resolution, and the reaction, the story shifts into its final thematic takeaway. The core premise here is incredibly simple but absolutely foundational. Nothing is impossible for Jesus. This is the bedrock for the ultimate lesson of our explainer today. The extreme example of controlling the weather, of literally manipulating the wind and the sea, establishes a baseline of infinite capability. If the chaotic forces of nature can be instantly pacified with 4 simple words, it implies, for sure, that this level of authority extends to absolutely everything. Which leads straight to this final, powerful instruction: trust him even in life's greatest storms. This is where the story becomes deeply personal for us. It takes the literal, physical storm from the beginning of the narrative and turns it into a brilliant metaphor for our own modern-day difficulties. Because let's be real, we all face our own storms. Situations where we feel like we're in that small boat, totally vulnerable and just terrified of sinking. This message is speaking directly to you, urging you to apply the lesson of the disciples' amazement to your own life. The message is crystal clear. The exact same authority that brought peace to that raging sea can bring peace to whatever chaos you might be facing right now. And that brings us to the conclusion of our breakdown. In just 20 seconds, we've gone from absolute terror to absolute peace, all guided by a perfectly structured sequence. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If a storm is just an opportunity to witness what is truly possible, how might that change the way you look at the dark clouds gathering in your own life today? Are you focused on the crashing waves, or are you looking for that calm presence right there in the boat with you? Thank you so much for joining me today as we unpack this incredible sequence. Keep learning, keep seeking clarity, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.